If regulatory reporting were a house, would you say we've built it on bedrock or on shifting data sands?
With the arrival of AI, I would say that bedrock has become liquefied. And there's a good reason for it. We used to think that regulatory and the data that underpinned it were very foundational. We knew the mappings, we knew the architectures, we knew the rules and regulations, but they were oftentimes from a single regulator. They were a single oversight group. And what we're beginning to see, especially with the more intelligent systems that are linking data across different platforms, again, we used to do reg tech in silos. As we begin to link those things across in different platforms, what happens is we begin to all of a sudden realize, well, wow, that we're given different data maybe to a different regulator for a different purpose because it underwent a transformation or had different semantics, or maybe it wasn't even the same structure. We just called it something very much the same. And so I think what we're beginning to see with the advent of, AI onto the circle maybe 4 years ago, which again, AI has been around since the 1960s. It just happens that Gen AI and some of the others are much better. But I think what happens is it's shifting and that bedrock is liquefying because now we have different insights, analytics, capabilities. The technologies are much more advanced than we had even 4 or 5 years ago. And so we're going from this idea of siloed regulatory tech that went for a single regulator, single oversight. And now when we begin to link those across, and we see this across different sovereign nations across the globe, as well as our own, is that these data components are inconsistent. And that's why we've kind of gone from this bedrock mindset that was really solid. We could adhere to our regulators. But as time went on, we're like, oh, we have something that is not quite consistent here. And that exposes us up to risk. It exposes up to hallucinations on the AI standpoint. And it really opens us up to bad brand, if you will, because people are going to start to notice this and regulators are going to notice this. And then we take on a whole different genre of, are we being truthful or are we trying to hide something?
Wow. What an opening, guys. What an opening. Mark Dangelo. Mark is the co-founder of AXTent. We're going to get into AXTent or AXTent, or you're going to tell me exactly what it is.
Extent, there we go.
XTent.
Yeah.
You are a frequent writer for the Mortgage Bankers Association. That's how you and I met.
Yes.
I saw one of your articles after I joined MISMO, and I'm like, this guy gets it. I need to learn from him. But you're also writing and published in Reuters and other places. We're going to get into all things Mark Dangelo for sure, but I want to talk about a recent article in particular where you talked about a house being built on data sands, and in mortgage, frankly, we've been living on shifting sands for decades. PDFs, duplicative reporting, agency silos. And so, what I want to talk about today in this episode is what solid ground looks like. Are you up for that?
Sure.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, Mark. I
I
appreciate
appreciate
you
it.
joining the MISMO Mic'd Up podcast. So let's start with what's broken about how regulatory data is handled today.
We touched on this, at kind of the opening salvo is that regulatory reporting's always been that I adhere to the rules. And which rules are we talking? Which regulator, which oversight, what version of the rules? And so that's what's oftentimes broken. And it's not the fact that people were wrong, it's just how we approach systems. If you look at, and again, when I had hair a long time ago, I've been in computer science roughly 40 some years. I teach over at Case Western modern database management to the new students. I've done this stuff around the globe in 20 some countries. And what I've seen over all these decades of doing this is that we approach data as part of the system. And also from a regulatory standpoint, we do the same. So it's within that silo. So we go business rules, we go system, which is the process, and then we think about the data. And that is oftentimes the problem and where this problem has been really brought to light, a spotlight put on it, is with the advent of all these AI type of solutions. We've gone from Gen AI with retrieval augmented generation. We've gone now to agentic AI, which is kind of self-decisioning, self-components. And now we even gone to agentic AI with RAG. So, and that's just in 4 years. So we've gone through an iteration a year. What's 26 going to bring, you know? So when we look at this, that's why it's challenged. I don't want to say it's broken, but it's evolving. It's really on that liquefied bedrock because we've often done these in components. We've compartmentalized them. And the problem with regulatory capabilities and cross-agency reporting is that we can no longer compartmentalize them. We have to have the same data. And why is that? That's good business. But at the same time, think about all the inefficiencies that are humped on and lumped on people within the organization, within the industries themselves. It doesn't have to be mortgage. It could be anything in financial services or insurance. Look at all the people that are required to keep that stuff consistent. We don't have one version of the truth. We have many versions of the truth. And when you do that, just like we did systems from the business rules, we have the same problem with regulatory data. And that is the opportunity to correct that. And you know, folks like MISMO and other ones, the ISO 22, you look at HL7 models on the healthcare side, the ability of standards to take away that ambiguity is really something that we didn't think about. Even things like the Financial Data Transparency Act, which is out there and regulated from 2017, 2019, coming into full force, that's the US. When you look at that, we didn't even think about this when those rules were written. Just like MISMO is what, 26 years now,
That's right.
you know, and counting. We sure didn't think about this. And when we often talked as computer scientists or old CIOs and CTOs, we're like, we don't need standards. That limits our innovation. You know, that was always the mindset, right? And I think what we're seeing is that ability of having these standards to deal with things like regulation, operational reporting, are now the table stakes to make things better. And that's kind of the opportunity, at the same time the challenge.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the CA the older, not in age,
Oh, come
in
on.
in time, the mindset of we don't need standards, it's going to
Right.
slow us down. At our recent MISMO summit just a few weeks back,
Hmm.
um, I was struck by the number of de novo, startup techs that were in attendance,
Right.
people I'd never seen in our industry before. Frankly, very young people, like 20
Exactly.
something,
They have
and
hair. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of hair. And I asked each of them. There was four of them. I did a post on this recently on LinkedIn. There was four of them that showed up. They took the time to register and show up for this event. And I asked them, why are you here? What drew you to this MISMO summit? And all four of them kind of answered similarly that they did some research, recognized the mortgage industry still is ripe for,
Mhm.
I don't want to say disruption as much as innovation, right? In innovation to really lead to solving big problems like taking cost out of the equation.
Correct.
And what they recognized in their research was that this foundation that is MISMO, these standards that exist, can accelerate, their product building exponentially. They're
Yes.
not starting from, a place where they have to rebuild a
Hmm.
broken framework. They're literally starting from ground zero. And so I think a lot of the seasoned, executives and CIOs, CTOs in the industry could take a lesson from these startup founders, these young startup founders, and how they're recognizing the foundation of good data, and in particular the standards that have been built around MISMO.
And you touch on a point. It's not necessarily age, it's a mindset. We are in a fundamental mindset shift where, again, we all started with the business rules, but we went to the systems first. That's how we did. We code. What are you going to code it in? Where's it going to be? And then we focused on the data. Well, is it a relational? Is it something else? Is it a vector database? Whatever. That's where we kind of got into, was the whole engineering mindset. We never really thought that we'd have to bring all this together. And why didn't we? Well, we created things like data warehouses, data marts, data lakes, data lake houses. We created all these things that allowed us to circumvent the fundamental challenge and the opportunity that standardization brings us on a semantic level, on a consistency level, on a schema level, on a structured data level. If you think about all the things that MISMO, for instance, has worked for 26 years, those table stakes allow us to perform much quicker. And it's not that the generational differences there or the mindset. We wanted to do this. And again, I could go back in my career in the 80s, talking about compartmentalization and orchestration, management concepts that were very big. Data isolation, modulation, which we talked about in the old IBM mainframe days, but we couldn't do it because one, we didn't have the data, the brain power, but we didn't have the performance and the tech and the code and the ability to compartmentalize these things like we do for Legos. It's like kids' Legos. I can build these things up, different color, different sizes. I stack them upon other, and I can make something better. And I think that's what those folks are seeing, that they're saying there are some unique, very powerful building blocks here that if we just applied them differently, shifted them farther up in the food chain, if you will, actually look at this like a industry that we're going to process, or a factory mindset, we can change the way, not just, accuracy and the cost of a loan, but we can shorten the cycle. I mean, we could go from a 45 to 75 day mindset, which is still existing, and we could shorten that maybe 2-3 times. The AI agentic, the things that are evolving, and we're still very much in that emergent stage. As those things mature and our organization matures with them, we now can take and begin to really change that whole life cycle. And now we can turn it into a competitive advantage, because what if I could save $500 to $1,000 alone using some of these differences, these standards, to actually build different products? And again, there's a different mindset, and I think you and I have had this discussion. The difference between what I'd say is regulatory consistency and regulatory or compliance modernization. If you look at the idea of regulatory consistency, that's really saying, how do I get consistency of the data across different reporting capabilities, state, federal, local, whatever it is, versus compliance modernization, which is where we always jump to, just like we do for today in AI engineering. Everything's about, well, how is it, how many structures and where's it coming from and all this other good stuff. We talk about the engineering architecture versus the regulatory consistency. We go to reg tech to solve the problem and make it go away, but we don't realize that all we're doing is kicking that can down the block.
Let's take a little divergent here, a little break in the conversation, because I want to talk about AXTent. And
Okay.
you mentioned that you're a professor at Case Western. You're clearly, people that are familiar with your work from a publication perspective see you in the various publications, MBA for those that are in the industry. But
Mhm.
tell us about AXTent. What your work is there, and why folks tuning into this podcast should be paying attention.
AXTent really has been going on as a concept and a solution. It's very much focused on the architecture. So when we begin to put these things together, how do you assemble them? We are not going to be a product mindset. So if you look at the vendors, or vendors are coming saying, oh my gosh, we've got a different competitor, or the folks that showed up there trying to do a product. That's not the foundation. AXTent is about how do we put it together using advanced data architectures to create consistency, not just in regulatory consistency, but also compliance modernization. So it's a different mindset of saying, just like, and there's precedence for this. This isn't something that, we created. If you could go back to the days of IBM and the Big Iron and Honeywell's and all this, this was called the Zachman framework. We looked at this from a system data, a technology process type of stuff. Now we've gotten in more open source in the world. We call that TOGAF, TOGAF. TOGAF is really about the architecture focused on multiple elements, but it's open source. People can contribute to it, just much like MISMO does, and create the standards. How do you put all these things together? Because I don't believe, and this is where AXTent was really formed, is that we don't believe with our founders, people we work and collaborate with, that one organization can control this. There's not one vendor. And how do we do this? We do this through a concept of understanding what the business rules are. And then we say, okay, the data's down here. Those are the systems of record, you know. So we got this huge gap oftentimes in the middle. And what do? We create systems and write type. AXTent is about creating more advanced architectures, what we call data domains or data meshes in this case. A mesh is an idea of a domain of interest. Let's say mortgage, let's say something else, tax, it could be different financial reportings, but it is a domain of interest. And within that domain, you have set standards, you have capabilities, you have schemas, you have many to many, one to many type of relationships. You have all this wonderful stuff that goes on a very technical level. But the reality is we create these domains, but again, they are compartmentalized. How do we do that through an architecture like AXTent? We create what we call data fabrics. Data fabrics are, again, we tried this years ago. We used to call it something that was very rudimentary called master data management. We called this enterprise architectures. But the reality is that now we have the technology with this to integrate a fabric that says, I need this from this domain, this from this domain, this from this domain, and I don't have to move the data anymore. And that is the key difference. Data meshes and data fabrics aren't about taking all the data and lifting and shifting it like we used to do in the warehouse days and transform. It's about leaving it at the system of record and creating these abstraction levels in between that allow people to do this. And so we don't have to move and create all this data. We don't have to manage it. We don't have to keep it all up to date. We don't have to do all. We just go back to the system of record. And these are basically like maps into the data itself. We use the technology, the security, the privacy, all the things that are existing at those levels versus trying to recreate it all. And so AXTent is the idea of saying we're taking advanced data architectures horizontally to link the vertical domains. So we have data meshes vertical, data fabrics on the horizontal basis. We link them all together, business rules on top. The advanced architectures in the middle form the foundation of AXTent. All the systems of record, all the vendor products, things like Informatica, things like LOSs or whatever they would be, they still exist. All we're doing is leveraging them in a different way to get active governance, to get active lineage. We don't have to go trace this stuff down. If the auditor wants to know what's going on or how that decision was made or what version of MISMO did they use, where was the data coming, we can link this all together. And that's the fundamental concept here, is that we couldn't do that 5 years ago. We just did not have the tech or even the brain power. But we have people that are actually doing components of this. We have JP Morgan doing components of this. We have Fifth Third doing components of this. Maybe not within the mortgage space, but they are taking these ideas and bringing them together. That's how AXTent was genesis. And to give, just to give some color for this, I've been writing for the mortgage banking since I stopped being a CIO 23 years ago. So I've been writing for them, and 5 years ago, Mike Sorahan, who retired from MBA, Mike channeled me to create a document for the 22 annual convention that says mortgage systems adapt or die. Mm. And so it was really kind of one of those things that said you have to start looking at this. And that was the foundation for this, because we began to say there's 80, 90 different processes across mortgage. How do you bring all that information together? And obviously MISMO is the table stake, but it's not only the piece. You've got vendors implementing unique ways, different things. You have to link those together. That's what we're talking about with AXTent.
Yeah, I love the example of the financial institutions that you named, right? Because you have, at the core, you have a human, a consumer,
yes,
who exists in a financial institution like JP Morgan, or Fifth Third, as your example, in multiple verticals, multiple domains, multiple product sets, including mortgage, right?
Correct.
And I came from, before joining MISMO and doing a short stint in a tech startup, I spent 30 years, in mortgage banking, but within federally regulated financial institutions, where I recall being at Flagstar and in seeing our customer in mortgage differently than we saw our customer, in the banking side or in the consumer lending side. And so I think what you described is really allowing institutions to have a true holistic real time view of their customer. And I think actually I think independent mortgage bankers, I think mortgage originators slash servicers can take us, you know, use the same playbook in terms of how they evaluate their customer relationship and most importantly retain that customer along, you know, their life cycle of home ownership.
Well, and you mentioned the IMBs and some of the big folks, Morgan and the rest of these folks. Um, the reality is you don't have to have multi-million-dollar budgets to make this happen. There are ways to do this. There are technologies, the solutions. Again, this is what the whole AXTent mindset was. I don't really care what the products are. What I care about is what are we trying to achieve? What are the business rules? How do I get that? Where's the data? There's probably going to be some remediation or rethinking of that data core to make it happen. But the tech is no longer the issue. And that's oftentimes where we focus. We're like, oh, it's got to be this tech or this vendor or that vendor. No, the ability to mix and match heterogeneously using business to data to systems is really a solution. And this changes the vendor equation. Now, again, some people may be upset about that, especially the vendors. But I think it actually makes their products and solutions more valuable because now we do have that true machine readability, the interoperability that allows the data to be unlocked.
So I want to kind of bring this home in a really tangible, tactical manner. And so, you know, our audience is principally going to be, you know, leaders of independent mortgage bankers, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are, you know, companies that typically don't have massive tech staffs. They might not even have a CIO, CTO, you know, in their organization. So given where we're at, and you kind of said we're at this early stage of AI, and when I think of AI in mortgage, I've said this a few times. I think we're in the first inning still.
Mm-hmm.
Some have told me that the national anthem hasn't even been played yet, so we're somewhere very early,
Very
you know,
good.
in
Yeah.
our journey. What would you be advising, you know, mortgage executives, leaders of these independent mortgage bankers to be doing today, to make sure that they're, you know, taking advantage of what's available today, but also positioning themselves and their businesses for opportunities in the future?
There's some real simple things that don't involve a lot of technology. And they probably do components of this already. Is where is that data coming from? How many times do you have to transform it from point A to point B to point C? Does it come off a PDF? Do you then have somebody transcribe it? You mentioned the humans, kind of the human in the loop on the AI mindset. Is it human oversight or human in the loop where I actually have to take something that AI feeds back, manually transform it or confirm it, and then move it down the process versus the next gen of AI, which is truly autonomous decision making based on goals, based on encapsulated rules, based upon the constraints that are applied to that data. The fundamental thing they can do is saying, where does that data come from? How can I track its lineage? And the way you do that is very simple. You borrow the mindset from an auditor. You buy and basically say, how do I get that? Where is the least amount of times I can touch that data? If I'm touching it more and more to get it from the consumer back into something on the securitization side to Fannie Freddie, GSEs, or whatever, that's how many times do I have to deal with that data in a different way or different form? Do I have the right definition? Am I using consumer even as the same name? What does the consumer mean? Is that a compound value where first name, last name? Where's their address? I mean, basic things that say, am I at the most discrete element that I can source? It has date and time, it has security, it has the privacy. And as I move it along, I am using it once, I am creating it once, I am using it multiple places, all the same way. And from an IMB, that is probably something you can get your hands around. You don't have to have tech. I mean, you could be doing this on Excel spreadsheets. You could be even doing this on pieces of paper. But the mindset here is that I don't have to create a quantum physics type of a solution here to make that data valid. And that's the problem, is that we often go from the business challenge, the risk, the opportunity of the data itself, and then we're like, oh, where's the solution? No, how are you getting that? How many people? What's the efficiency? Do I have the right skill sets? What skill sets am I missing? Do I need? What does that do to my partner relationships as I begin to move this down? Do they kick it back to me and say that's the wrong data? All that type of information doesn't necessarily require some high-end reg tech or mortgage solution that oversees that data to do the manipulation. Manipulation is all about, and the transformation is once you understand what that data is. And this is where, when we get into more regulatory things like Financial Data Transparency Act or FDTA, the Structured Business Reporting or the SBR and all that good stuff, that is about a broad compliance base of consistency. And that is also what we need to do within the domain vertical of mortgage to basically say, how does all that go? And again, MISMO is a great place to start that journey. And if you haven't done it, then the question is, why not? And then if you have, then you have to ask yourself, okay, what versions are we using? Is it traceable? Can I reconcile the different time of when those different definitions or versions were? I mean, this is basic human thought that doesn't require AI to tell me what I need to do.
Love it. Mark, this has been a an education for me for sure, and I appreciate you coming on
I
and sharing
appreciate the
your
time.
I appreciate the expertise, your experience. We'll definitely do this again. I do want to let the audience know, we have in MISMO, we have a an AI community of practice, and so these I don't know that the conversation has gotten to this level yet, but there's a lot of conversations that are happening in this community of practice. I encourage you to check it out. You can, go to mismo.org. You can quickly navigate to the AI community of practice, pop in there, learn from your peers in the industry and how they're thinking about, managing, their business within the AI construct. I may even, Mark, recruit you to come in and talk to that group at some point in the future.
Be happy to do it. I'd leave folks with one more thought, if I may. Is AI is about asking oftentimes not questions, but different questions. And that's really the question is, what different questions is this going to bring up, force, whatever the right, verb is there to basically say, I need to rethink how I am using or creating or transforming that data. And AI is, if anything, not Gen AI necessarily. Gen AI can deal with the ambiguity of the data and can infer stuff. That's chaos when it comes to agentic AI, which is where the mortgage industry probably wants to go for streamlining and costs and all that other stuff, is because it has to make decisions on things that are validated before it gets into the stream. If you start feeding into like agentic AI, unstructured CRUD kind of data that is inconsistent, poor data quality, and is all over the map, guess what happens? You begin to go from those guardrails. I begin to hallucinate very quickly. So it's about asking the different questions, but make sure that they're relevant to your data, not necessarily the process you serve.
I love that. That takes us right back to the beginning, right? That's the shifting
Exactly.
sands right there. Mark, thank you so much.
I
To
appreciate
the
it.
audience, thank you all for tuning in. Come back for our next episode of MISMO Mic'd Up.